Hi, everyone. This is our sixth week for the course. This week, we're going to look at 20th century revival and renewal movements, beginning particularly with the Azusa Street revival. Um, what were some of the preceding movements in the 19th century that led to the emergence of Pentecostalism and other renewal movements? Certainly, the Holiness movement and the Keswick movement both were influential in emphasizing an emphasis on Spirit baptism, Holy Spirit baptism, and empowerment, the empowerment of the Holy Spirit for both sanctification in the Holiness movement and for power to preach the gospel in the Keswick movement. And there were other groups that significantly influenced the emergence of the Pentecostal and other renewal movements, beginning with groups like Edward Irving in Great Britain, who established a church in the 1830s that had the first modern historical recorded incidents of speaking in tongues in English speaking churches at that time. But even earlier than that, though, at the camp meetings at Cane Ridge, Kentucky, um, 30 years earlier than that, there was a variety of spiritual manifestations, people being slain in the spirit, people laughing in the spirit, people um, barking like dogs in the spirit, supposedly, and other manifestations that even we've seen today in modern renewal movements. And also, there are some historically anecdotal recordings of perhaps speaking in tongues at Cane Ridge. Certainly, there were a variety of prophetic utterances, people being healed. Um, Another group that emphasized healing around the middle of the 19th century was a German evangelist named Johann Blumhardt, who helped establish healing homes in Germany. He was really the person originally that first started the healing home movement, which is prominent in some renewal circles today. John G. Lake helped establish that further in the early 20th century, but he was really the pioneer. Another group that spoke in tongues in the 19th century were the Shaker movement, and who had some unique and unusual beliefs. They were a very ascetic group that really emphasized some unique Christian beliefs, but certainly very spiritually and holiness oriented. Another group that was certainly a very heterodox Christian movement that spoke in tongues in its early recorded history was the Mormon movement. Brigham Young, one of the early founders of the Mormon movement, spoke in tongues. Um, the uh, There was also the Molokhan revival of 1832 and 33 that started in Russia, and it's recorded in some of their historical documents that it was expected you would speak in tongues after being baptized in the Holy Spirit. Um, Another group was in North Carolina, where there was a spiritual Holy Spirit baptism revival in a church that started there, which really helped establish one of the really the very first Pentecostal church that we would associate with modern Pentecostalism, the Church of God from Cleveland, Tennessee. Some early founders and progenitors of the Pentecostal movement. There's a variety of them. I'm just going to mention two. One is Alexander Dowie. He established Zion Tabernacle in Chicago in 1894. His church had controversy and it declined after his death in 1907, but a new preacher from Chicago, William Durham, had just received spirit baptism at Azusa Street, and many of Dowie's followers joined him. However, the largest lasting legacy of Dowie's influence are the Zion churches of South Africa, which were established by one of uh, Alexander Dowie's followers, Daniel Bryant. And incidentally, that's the largest Christian denomination in South Africa. Another important progenitor, or somebody that started their ministry before the Pentecostal movement, but an important figure, is Maria Woodworth Etter. She first became a Christian in 1857 during the prayer revival of 1857, which is talked about in Elmer Towns' text about the 10 greatest revivals in history. It's an important revival movement that we've also talked about last week. But she wanted to be involved in evangelistic ministry, but her local Disciples of Christ Church prohibited that because she was a woman. However, a local Quaker church ordained her and allowed her to be an evangelist. And there she was also introduced to Holy Spirit baptism, because many Quaker churches, I would say most Quaker churches, were emphasized the Holy Spirit very much so in their history and continue to do so today. She was very involved in healing ministry, had a large evangelistic tent ministry, and she became a founding member of the Assemblies of God in 1914. So another group, why do we have the Kardashians here in this lecture? Well, there's a reason, not just because they're such an iconic group of people in today's society, but interestingly enough, a little known fact, their great-great-grandfather, I think the great-grandfather of Robert Kardashian, who's the patriarch of this family, came to the United States as an Armenian immigrant. His family was introduced to Spirit baptism and directly influenced by the Molokhan Russian revival that swept into Armenia, and a prophetic warning was given to that family and other families in this region to flee Armenia and to come to America. Those that heeded the warning came to America, established themselves as immigrants in California. But the rest, sadly, were wiped out in what is called the Armenian Genocide. There's actually a movie that just came out this week called The Promise. If any of you, I don't know if any of you watched it or not, but it's surrounded by the historical issue of the Armenian Genocide. But it's just a little known fact. If you Google or go to the Wikipedia article on Robert Kardashian, you can actually read about the prophetic warning that was given to his grandfather or his great-grandfather. But probably the single most influential revival event that occurred at the early part of the 20th century was the Azusa Street Revival. Anyway, so it was started in a prayer meeting by a recently arrived pastor to Los Angeles named William Seymour. He came and was invited to speak at a church, but he began to introduce this new idea of Holy Spirit baptism with the evidence of speaking in tongues. And he was actually locked out of his own church. And so he and some members of that church moved to a house on Bonnie Bay Street, where they all were baptized in the Holy Spirit on April 9th, 1906. And then the crowds grew so big that they had to move to another location called the Azusa Street Mission. And on April 18th, the LA Times gave reports of growing crowds as this fledgling movement took off. But from Azusa Street, people went all over the world, spreading the early Pentecostal message. So here's a list of some of the early pioneers. Louis Petrus established Pentecostal churches in Sweden. His founding church became the largest Pentecostal church in the world or it was the largest Pentecostal church in the world until 1965. Ivan Voronev was a early Pentecostal pioneer in Russia. He sadly died in a Russian communist prison while planting churches in Slavic nations. Minnie Abrams went as a missionary to India and